Hi, I'm Ananya. I'm a junior content manager with Trip 101. And today we're traveling all the way down south to New Zealand. And I have on the call here with me, Douglas, who's from Auckland. And going to tell us all about a remote corner of New Zealand, which is called the Ahuriri Valley. So welcome to our session today, Douglas. And we welcome you to this session. We want to learn more about you as well as the destination that we're covering today, which is Ahuriri Valley.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
So tell us more about yourself, where you're based, and how did you come to travel, like document your travel on your website as well as your Instagram handle.
Yeah, so basically I'm a business consultant, and this is kind of a hobby business that I do on the side. And it's a little bit different, I think, in the context of the travel industry, where I've focused almost entirely on free things to do around New Zealand as opposed to the things that you pay for. So I have a website called tripideas.nz. It's got about 1,100 places on it, and I'm adding places every week that people can go to. And 99% of the things on there you can do for free. And the Ahuriri Valley is just one of these quite remote locations that you can go to, and you can just drive. You do need a car. You can drive in, spend a day, do some walking, hiking, have a picnic, and drive back out again.
Right. So was it like a day trip that you yourself also did to the Ahuriri Valley?
Yeah, it was part of a multi-day trip where one of the things on my agenda was to go down the valley. I've known about it for a number of years, but never quite had the time to drive down there. You've really got to allocate a decent day to get down there. It's a rough road. One part of the road, you can only do it in a four-wheel drive, but you can get probably three-quarters of the way down the road before you have to worry about that too much. So yes, it was a trip I was doing around the MacKenzie country, which is the wider area to the north of Ahuriri Valley, which also takes you into places like Lake Tekapo, Mount Cook, which are much better known than the Ahuriri Valley.
Okay, right. And you were mentioning your website where you're documenting these free things to do. So how long have you been running Trip Ideas?
About 4 years now. And a large part of what I've been doing is traveling around New Zealand, taking photos, going to lots of different places that I've always wanted to go to, but never quite had the time to do. And then basically putting them on the website.
So you're on a quest to sort of cover all locations in New Zealand.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Everywhere that's worth going, basically.
Okay. And you've been in New Zealand all your life?
Yes. Yeah, I've been in Auckland for most of my life.
Okay. There's something quite wonderful about mapping your country that way, like traveling each of these locations and putting it out there on your website, documenting it, or making it known for other people who might want to visit, both locals as well as internationally.
Yes, I mean, it's a very enjoyable way to spend your time, really. You get to see places you've probably thought about, and it gives you kind of like a bit more of a rationale, a reason to go there in many cases.
So far, how many areas have you already covered, or like how many trips have you already made within New Zealand?
There's about 1,100 places on the website, and I've got a backlog of several hundred that I've yet to post. But like I would say, most months I would be out going to places, taking photos. But it's not a daily activity. So it's typically like on a trip, I can get like enough content in the course of a day for like 7 or 8 days worth of Instagram posting. That would be pretty typical. So 1,100 places in about 4 years. That's pretty much what it's been so far.
Ah, okay. That's quite a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're traveling, do you go on your own or is it like a group that you travel with or your family?
It varies. I mean, I mostly travel with my partner, Melanie, and sometimes with my two daughters who are kind of grown up now, but occasionally we do things together. That would be 99% of the travel I do would be with my family.
Ah, okay. That's really nice. Yeah. And you're together exploring your country. So that's pretty fabulous.
Yes.
So coming to the Ahuriri Valley, tell us like when did you go?
That trip was about a year ago. So it would have been about September last year. So it's spring, early spring, which is why there's still a reasonable amount of snow on the mountains and in quite a few of the photos. And as I say, it was part of a kind of a multi-day trip around the wider region near the Ahuriri Valley. So I spent several days located at like the next valley over is called the Lake Ohau, and I stayed at a lodge based in Lake Ohau. And then kind of a little bit further north again is Mount Cook, and I stayed at the hotel there, the Hermitage Hotel. So it's quite difficult to stay up the Ahuriri Valley. You've either got to camp or stay in dog huts, which you've got to walk into. There is accommodation there, but it's very small. And in terms of the number of people it can take, and one of the options is extremely expensive. It's a very upmarket lodge at several $1,000s a day to stay there.
Oh, okay. So there are pretty few options within
Yeah,
the
yeah,
exact
but it's not
location.
a, yeah, most people would do what I do. They'd go in, they'd spend a day, and they'd go out again. So unless you're kind of like a keen tramper, hiker, you want to camp overnight, stay in one of the huts where you could walk right up the end of the valley, that would be the other option.
So we'll discuss the stay options a little bit later. But before that, you said you went in September, which was spring. So is that like the good time to visit the valley?
I think so because I think a lot of these places, although you're kind of going into a remote, quite mountainous area, in spring it's not too cold generally. I mean, you have to pick the right day. You wouldn't go in a snowstorm or in bad weather. But as you can see in the photo, we had good weather on the day and it was quite warm. It was probably about 15 to 16 degrees, so comfortable temperature, especially if you're hiking. So yeah, personally, I think that's a good time to go as long as you pick a nice day.
Okay. So you mentioned that it was about like a 7 or 8 day trip where you were traveling around these various locations. And then one of these you spent within Ahuriri.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
So what was the larger trip like? As in, how had you planned this trip overall? Like, what all were the spots that you had on your...
Yes, there were several locations that I wanted to go to, and they're all places, with one exception, they're all places I hadn't been to before. This was one of them. Then, as I say, we stayed at a lodge at Lake Ohau, and I'd been to the lake several times before and had made some really nice photos from that area. But you can drive much further right up the side of the lake up into the valley, very similar to this valley, and surrounded by mountains on both sides. If you go all the way to the end of the valley, you're kind of right into the Southern Alps. And then as part of that trip, there was a particular kind of walk and campsite I wanted to visit, which was about halfway up the valley, roughly. So we spent a day doing that. Then we spent another day around the Mount Cook region, just doing some short walks that I hadn't done for many years and hadn't taken any photos of previously. And we also spent some time around, there's a big hydro lake electricity generation area region, and we spent some time on some of the canals that link several of the lakes, visiting campsites that are around that area. And again, just expedition, really taking photos of places that I hadn't been to previously, which I knew existed, but just hadn't been there.
So on which day did you exactly land up in which day of your
That
trip?
was the first. It was actually the first day of this part of the trip. Yep, the
Oh,
first
okay.
day. Yep. Second day it rained in the mountains, so we wouldn't have been able to do this trip. And so we actually went into some other parts of the MacKenzie country where it wasn't raining. It was kind of raining in the mountains, but once you got away from the mountains a bit, it was perfectly fine. So that was the second day and part of the third day as well. So it was the weather for this particular trip, the weather here was particularly good and series of photos, but it wasn't perfect everywhere else.
So you got lucky on some days and not so much on the others.
Yep, that's a trip to New Zealand.
Yeah. So you were saying that you were driving around all of these locations. So once you had landed up in the McKinsey country, you must have like rented a car or something, and then you were driving around.
You basically would fly into, normally if you're just visiting Mackenzie, you would fly into Christchurch and you'd rent a car in Christchurch and then drive sort of south and inland and then to the Mackenzie country. If you know where Queenstown is, Queenstown, Wanaka, kind of the major kind of tourism region. So the Mackenzie country is north of Wanaka and south of a range of hills and mountains that separate the Canterbury Plain from the Southern Alps, essentially. So it's probably to get into the Mackenzie from Christchurch is about a 3 hour drive.
Okay.
Yep, about 3 hours. So it's a reasonable hike,
Ah,
but that would
okay.
be the way to get in there. Most people would do the Mackenzie country not as a trip by itself, but as part of an extended trip. And they would drive through it and they would visit two or three kind of like really well-known places like Lake Tekapo. They would visit Mount Cook. They might stop at the Lindis Pass. And so most people wouldn't go up the Ahuriri Valley. You know,
Oh,
right, yeah, because you drive past the entrance road on the main highway, and it's just a dirt road with a sign. Most people wouldn't bother to drive up there.
okay. So why did you want to go there?
It's remote and beautiful.
And is it worthwhile taking that turn to Ahuriri
Oh,
Valley?
yeah, sure. I think so. It depends what you're interested in. It is
Yeah.
remote. That time of the year it looks particularly dry, end of winter, early spring, before really the grass has started to grow. It's mountainous, obviously. And the further up the valley you go, the prettier it is. It kind of becomes the valley gets a bit narrow and the mountains come in a bit. And it's much more attractive as you go more up the valley.
Ah, so is it the drive around MacKenzie country? Is it like a difficult one or is it reasonably okay for a mountain?
The drive itself,
Yeah.
yes, I
How?
think I'm just trying to think. I think it's about a 20-kilometer drive. About three-quarters of the way in, you get to the location of an old farmhouse where there's kind of a camping area and it's pretty basic, but there's kind of like an area where you can kind of park your car, you can have a picnic, and it's kind of right at the head of the conservation park. So the first kind of 15, 20 kilometers as you drive in is most of it is in like an area of farmland with an
Okay.
access road. And then when you get to as you get to the end of that part of the road, you go into the conservation park. And the conservation park was originally all farmed, and then it was taken over and turned into a conservation park 15, 20 years ago. So right at the start of the park is like an area of grassland and the old farmhouse and some old buildings and things of that nature and a big picnic area and some signs which tell you about the park. And then from there, you can drive a bit further in a car, but you get to a place where you really can't go across it in a car. You need a four-wheel drive. So to do the last 10 kilometers on the road, you really need a four-wheel drive. And then you get to the end of the road, and from there, you've got to hike. So you can hike into the mountains. You can hike a long way up the valley from there, but there's various
Oh,
options. And once you're in the park, you can camp anywhere. So if you've got a
oh,
tent, you can just kind of put your tent wherever you like.
right. Okay. Yeah. It sounds like quite a really remote part of the world, and it's only like meant for really adventurous people, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I think like to get the entrance of the park, you've got to want to drive a wee while on it's a rough road, but it's you can drive it in a car. You just need to be careful. It is very pretty, and I can show you more photos of what the kind of the road and the drive looks like. But to go much beyond the entrance to the park, you need to be a little bit more willing to, and also probably have a four-wheel drive. You can actually cycle in there as well. So it would be a fantastic, if you're a keen outdoor kind of cross-country cyclist, it would be a fantastic place to take a bike.
I'd love to hear now about the day that you spent over here. What all did you do once you took the turn to how did you run?
Yeah, so the goal was to drive as far as we could, which we did. We managed to we had a four-wheel drive and it was a little bit tricky in a couple of places, but we got all the way to the end of the road. And then there was a from there there's a multi-day tramp where you can walk all the way down to the end of the valley and back. And there's huts that you can stay in. That wasn't our plan. Our plan was to follow a shorter walk, which took you kind of a little bit up the valley, then cut inland towards one of the mountain ranges, and then you get into the beech forest. You get out of the kind of like very dry, grassy plain, and you can get into the beech forest. And from there, we ran out of time, but originally our intention was to cross a stream and then climb up into the mountains to a kind of an area where there's some waterfalls and things of that nature. But it was getting a bit dark by that stage, and we decided it was a little bit too risky to continue on. So unfortunately, we didn't manage to do that particular part of the walk that day. So it gives me a reason to go back at some stage.
Yeah. So is there like a cutoff time by which like the people who are just traveling for the day need to get back or
No, not really. It's more just like if you're driving down the road at night, it would be okay. The problem was the hike, and the hike it starts out and it's easy and it goes across some grassland and you get to the edge of the forest and then you've got a stream to cross. And all of that's reasonably straightforward, but then it climbs up through the forest quite steeply for 200 meters. So it goes up, in height 200 meters. Then it goes through the forest on the edge of a gorge or edge of a canyon, and then you get up into the mountains, and you just wouldn't want to be there. unless you had good gear and you're planning to sort of stay up there with a tent, you wouldn't want to be up there once it gets dark. It'd be, it wouldn't be the safest thing to do. So,
Okay,
and
yeah, of course.
we spent far too much time driving down the valley, taking photos. So by the
Yeah.
time we got to the end, we didn't realize how long it would take us to get to the end. We underestimated probably by about an hour. And then by the time we got to the end and we did the first part of the hike, we were going to run out of time. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's only so much you can do on foot in that latter half of the day before it gets dark.
yes, and often a lot of these places, these kinds of places, it's easy to underestimate how much time you need. So we allowed, I think, looking at the map and sort of checking all the distances, doing the research I could, we allowed about half a day, but really you need a day. To do the hike we wanted to do, you need a day.
Okay, yeah.
So
And this is for the shorter hike, right?
yeah,
The longer one, of course, I think probably
yes,
one needs to be camping over there.
yes, multi-day, yep.
Yeah, okay. So if you go back again, will you take the shorter hike again, or will you?
No, we'll do the shorter one again. Yep.
Okay, you don't have any plans to sort of attend and stay there overnight.
Not in this location. I mean, there's other places I would choose to go and camp and stay overnight before I went back in the Ahuriri Valley to do that.
Okay.
So yeah, there's lots of places in New Zealand which I think if you're thinking I'm going to hike into a place, stay overnight and hike out, this wouldn't be my first choice. So we can talk about one of those another time.
Oh, sure. Definitely. I'd love to hear more about these 1100 plus places that you even already posted about, and so many more that you have upcoming on your blog and website. So let's get into the stay that you did. So where was that exactly?
We stayed in two places. We stayed at the Lake Ohau Lodge, which has been around for a long time and it's pretty rustic, not particularly cheap and but quite rustic, a bit worn out in some ways. And in fact, it turned out when we were staying there that it was actually up for sale. So you sort of start thinking, do you want to own a lodge? Lake Ohau is a very beautiful place, and maybe someone wants to own a lodge there. But anyway, we thoroughly enjoyed it. The food was extremely good, and it's a nice warm place in what can be quite a cold area. And so that was good. The second place we stayed was quite a contrast, which is the Hermitage Hotel at Mount Cook, and that's very nice. And we had a very good room, I think on the sixth or seventh floor with views out to the mountains, including Mount Cook, which is the highest mountain in New Zealand. So it was, and again, because it was early spring, there was a lot of snow. So it was very beautiful.
So how many hours away are both of these locations from the Ahuriri Valley?
They're close. To get from the entrance to the Ahuriri Valley to Lake Orhos, maybe 30, 40 minutes. And then
Mhm.
to get from there to Mount Cook is 40, 50 minutes. No, they're not too
Okay.
far away. It's
Not,
quite the MacKenzie country. You can drive across it in about an hour. So
oh,
it's quite compact. When you're in it, it looks like a big, wide area, but it's actually to go to places and to see things around it. It's quite compact.
okay. So you were mentioning that the food at the lodge was pretty good. I was going to ask, like, are there any other options apart from where you're staying to like
Yeah,
get meals?
there's two towns in the MacKenzie country. There's Omarama and there's Twizel, and they have a range of accommodations, motels, hotels, Airbnb. There's quite a lot of Airbnb accommodation there. So yeah, if you want to go in there and stay for 2 or 3 nights, it's easy. You can
Ah, okay.
lots of options, different price ranges. It's just once you get up one of these valleys, like the Ahuriri Valley, there's not much there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So you have to be at least like 30, 40 minutes away. You will be able to find accommodations as well as meal options as well.
yeah, and obviously some hotels have food. There's grocery stores if you need to buy and cook for yourself. There's quite a few restaurants and cafes. So it's not hard to sort out food once you're in that area.
What about the food at the second location that you were staying at, Heritage Hotel?
It's very good. It's got a very good restaurant.
Okay. So both the places were quite good, the two that we stayed
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. And I should also mention, there's also Tekapo. So Tekapo has quite a few restaurants and cafes. And that's right next to Lake Tekapo, which is again another beautiful spot. So That's much more like Mount Cook and Tekapo are much more touristy. That's where most tourists would go.
Okay. So even though like there are still within like a short distance away, there are quite a few other options where you can sort of find an accommodation, find meals, and be surrounded by civilization, so to say, because the valley itself is pretty remote and
Yes, I think and that's true of anywhere in New Zealand. You can go to all sorts of remote places in New Zealand, but the reality is you're not far away from somewhere less remote, no matter where you go. New Zealand is qu quite a compact place, and this is a good example. You can go and spend a day in this, like the end of the world, really. And this I can feel like that once you're right down the end of the road, and then 40 minutes later you're back in a cafe or a restaurant or your accommodation, totally civilized. So, and that's common in New Zealand, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll move to my next question, which is about like what tips would you share with people who are visiting the Ahuriri Valley, or maybe you can say about the MacKenzie country itself. Like, what would be your advice to someone who's planning to
Yeah,
visit
I think for most people it's a drive-through, and people who stay would tend to maybe spend a day. They might spend a night at Tekapo and go around to Mount Cook and spend a night there, and they're definitely worth doing. Both of those are beautiful places, so they're definitely worth doing. Personally, I think it's quite a unique part of New Zealand. It's an almost semi-desert type environment surrounded by mountains and lakes, and there are a lot of things to do in the area apart from the two main tourist attractions. There's also a lot of very good bike riding. So if you're into bike riding, you can ride all around the area, around the various hydro canals, around the edge of the lakes, right into the mountains. There's a major bike trail that starts at Mount Cook and Tekapo, which goes all the way to the Pacific coast. It's a 4 or 5 day trail, which is enormous fun if you're a bike rider. And so, yeah, my main recommendation is that if you like kind of very outdoorsy, remote places, you can get down some of these valleys quite easily. Those day trips, you can spend time doing some sort of 1 to 2 hour hikes to some into beautiful forests, rivers, waterfalls. Hike back out again and be back in civilization the same day. So, and most people, even New Zealanders, aren't particularly aware of just how beautiful some of these areas are. So, if you want to get away from the crowd and you want to do something a bit different off the beaten track, there's plenty to do around the MacKenzie country.
sounds lovely. I like how you like it's like the end of the world, but it's also connected in a way so that you don't feel like you've gotten lost or something. You can still get back
Yeah,
within a short time. You can get back to sort of places which are a little bit more touristy, or which will towns which will have sort of people, places which will help you make feel connected again.
exactly.
So, since you were visiting Ahuriri for the first time, and then there were a couple of other locations that you had already been, what was the best part about this trip that you had in the MacKenzie country?
Like the Ahuriri Valley was pretty special, but also driving along the edge of Lake Ohau, it's into the valley from the edge of the lake. It's similar. It's a big glacial valley. The glaciers carved out these valleys 10, 15,000 years ago and then receded. So the valley's very similar. I think the walk we did was probably a bit better. So that was probably the main difference. It was just a little bit more accessible. It was a little bit quicker and easier to get to, quicker to get into the forest. And so it probably was the best bit of the trip. Doing that drive down the lake into the valley and then doing a walk into the forest. And that was Lake Ohau, basically driving down past Lake Ohau and doing one of the tracks there.
Maybe we should cover that later on in another call. So, you already mentioned, but you do plan to go back to Ahuriri as well at some point.
Yeah. Yes, we'll go
So,
back. We'll finish the walk that we didn't finish. So that'll be the main thing. I mean, there's other walks you can do there, but they're less interesting than the walk we were going to do.
So, based on your travels, if you were recommending to someone about like the places one can visit in the South Island in New Zealand, what would your suggestions be?
How much time have you got?
Maybe a week's trip?
A week's trip. So you can do a reasonable amount in a week, but my experience is people try to do too much and they end up spending a lot of time driving. So generally speaking, my suggestion would be go to a place and spend most of your time in the place. It's a way and do it in a car. It's hard to do really good things in New Zealand without a car. Buses don't get you everywhere, and the buses are a bit slow. So the buses is fine. Buses are fine for getting from place to place, but they're no good if you actually want to go out and explore. And then I think if you sort of follow that idea, go somewhere and spend a week, you will find there is an enormous amount to do almost no matter where you go. And it's all doable like as day trips. So, for example, in the Wanaka area, there would be 20 to 30 walks that you could do within 1 to 2 hours drive of Wanaka. And Queenstown would be the same. So if you're staying in Queenstown, there is enormous amount you can do within 1 to 2 hours drive. And if you want to just go and see, well, what are the kind of the 2 or 3 highlights, then obviously Mount Cook and Milford Sound. And the only downside with Milford Sound, it is a real hike to get there. It's a long drive. It's way down southwest side of the South Island. And the drive is beautiful and worth doing in its own right, but you're sort of committing to quite a long trip just to get to a place. So again, if I was going to do that, if you're thinking Milford Sound, you'd be better off going and staying in Te Anau for several days and just doing Milford Sound as one of your day trips. And that way you wouldn't feel as if you're just kind of like constantly on the move in a car. So that's my main recommendation. Choose a place. Don't think it matters too much where you choose. There's so many options in all the different places you can be in, and they're all beautiful. So just choose a place, spend a few days exploring within 1 to 2 hours drive, and you'll find a lot to do.
I really like this type of travel, like the vibe that I'm getting from you is that anywhere you go, just see the most out of it instead of trying to just hustle to the next spot.
Yes, you can do that too. It's just that you will miss a lot. And you
Yeah.
won't necessarily see, you will see the things which are popular and known as opposed to some of the things which are actually really cool. So yeah, that's the trade-off.
Yeah, I think this is a good approach as well. Like you give a place time, and you that's when it sort of opens up to you in a way.
So one of the things I've tried to do in trip ideas is that, so if you go, like Wanaka is a particularly good example where I would say that on trip ideas, there's maybe some 50, 60 things that you can do from Wanaka, like as easy trips. And so you could easily spend 2 weeks there. You couldn't do all of them in 2 weeks. It'd probably take you 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm trying to sort of, what I try to do with trip ideas is to give people as many options as possible within an area so that they can actually go, stay, find plenty of things to do.
That's pretty great. It's been great talking to you today, Douglas, and it's been
Nice to meet
great
you.
to just see the South Island, even if it's little parts of it through your eyes, because you have like extensive knowledge based since you've traveled so much over New Zealand. It's been really great to just even hear a little bit about it and get to know the location from you. So thank you
Yep.
so much for that.
Yep.
So with that, we'll sign off for today, and thank you so much.
Thanks very much.